tell you a story which is worth remembering. If you're in an open car and you come off the track and it rolls over, it goes light, dark as it rolls over. Always let go in the dark. That way you won't get crushed when you come out of the car and you're thrown out.
Hello everybody. Few would argue, I think, that the 1950s and 60s were some of the most exciting and dangerous times to be in motorsport. It was in this period that many of the brands we know today forged their legend. From the likes of Jaguar to Porsche, McLaren, Ferrari, this was an era where innovation was rampant and people were coming up with new and exciting ideas on an almost weekly basis. Today, many of the great stories have been told multiple times, but there are still a few lurking out there that deserve far more recognition than they get. And the one I am delighted to be able to share with you today is exactly that. This is the story of a man called Roger Nathan, who through his various contacts and exploits wound up competing in one of the weirdest race cars you've ever seen, the Costin-Nathan GT. What made it unusual? Well, this was a car that at its heart was made of wood. And it wasn't the joke you think it might have been. In fact, it turned out to be a winning formula. So here to tell the tale of that car and many others is the man himself. We'll roll the credits and then introduce you to Roger Nathan.
My father, when he came out of the army after World War II, along with my brother, my uncle rather, who flew in Lancasters, Dad started in the car business with a mate he came out of the army with in Warren Street. Because at that time, that's where all the second-hand car trading was done in Warren Street. This would be in the late 1940s. And he was a very sharp fellow. He was a good businessman, he was a student, he was a very hard worker, not lazy at all in any way. I wasn't very keen on school. I missed a lot of school due to some back problems and various ill health. I didn't enjoy my school days very much, and I left at 15, which you could do in those days. And I went to work in Hamleys, in Regent Street, the toy shop. I wanted to join in the model aircraft department on the ground floor. I was always interested in planes. So I remember my uncle telling me after he came back from the war about the aircraft and training in South Africa, and it seemed like great stuff. And also at that time you had Neville Duke flying Hunters and getting the world airspeed record, breaking the sound barrier for Britain. It was all great stuff. Everyone wanted to be either a fireman, a jet pilot or a train driver. Yes, I was thinking about going to the Air Force because I wanted to be a pilot actually. That was what I wanted to be. I think that's the only thing in my life that I wanted to be was a pilot. But having left school at 15, my mathematics were poor, and I was told you need maths, and I wasn't good at maths.
Being surrounded by the car world at such a young age, I asked Roger if there was one that really stood out to him.
Well, I think that one's quite easy to answer, my first car, which I managed to get when I was 16. And it was a three-wheeled BMW Isetta bubble car. The front door had a clamshell door, and you would turn the handle down, you open the door, and the door would swing out with a steering column on a universal joint. And you sort of step into it and pull the door shut, and the steering column would come back. That had three wheels, and I could drive it at 16 because if you blanked off the reverse gear and you only had three wheels, it was taxed as a motorcycle, which meant you could drive it at 16. I mean, to me, it was a wonderful thing. I would have the freedom to drive, and it was quite easy to drive in those days. My father stepped in the car on the little circular road and said, "Come on, son," he said, "I'll show you how to drive." And for 20 minutes he yelled at me, "Get your foot off, get your foot off. Don't slip the clutch like that." And after 20 minutes he said, "I can't stand this anymore, you carry on by yourself." Off I went. I failed my first driving test because I didn't have any lessons. And I wasn't looking in the mirror apparently. The driving was all right, but I wasn't looking in the mirror. And I passed second time without a problem. So I got my licence at 16. The Isetta lasted the best part of a year. I did 13,000 miles on that little thing. And on a flat road with no wind, it would actually do 54 miles per hour. Consumption, I don't know, because fuel was so cheap in those days, it was like water. You didn't consider it. Probably about 20p a gallon or something. And but it did have a problem. In the rain, the water would get inside the drum, two drum brakes on the front. and you never know which one was going to be dry or wet. So the first time you put the brakes on, having gone through a puddle or a wet road, it will pull violently left or right. It will actually go across the road. So you have to be very, very careful. It was quite dangerous, that. And also, it would misfire because water would somehow get into the petrol tank. But it would clear when it stopped spluttering and splurting, it would go off again, no problem. That was a horrible thing. I mean, looking back, it was absolute rubbish. That was the first car BMW produced after the war. And I thought at the time, it was a wonderful thing. We put a radio in, there was nowhere on the front to put a radio, so I put the radio behind me on the shelf. So I'd have to turn around and turn your head knobs and you had to tune it in. You didn't put buttons to push. And first you turned it on, waited for it to warm up because you needed this big box with valves in to start glowing before you get any signal. That took 2 or 3 minutes. And then it would bleep and squeak and squawk until you got a station. And this was all sort of behind me on the shelf. Crazy. Straight from the bubble car to the Healey. It was a very nice, it was an ivory coloured one, off-white, Healey 3000 Mark II. And it had the 6-cylinder lorry engine in it, the BMC lorry engine, straight 6-iron engine, weighed a tonne. I actually did 120 miles an hour in that on the motorway. It was quite frightening. And it had very uncomfortable seats. You used to get terrible backache driving it. It was things like seats in those days, I mean, people didn't pay much attention to them. You had a seat, you just sat in it. But that was a big jump from the 300 or 300cc bubble car, whatever it was, 350cc Isetta. By this time he was doing quite well in the car trade, and he became very friendly with Bernie Ecclestone. They used to go on holiday together with their wives. Bernie was married to a lady called Ivy at the time, had a little daughter. And he'd come to us most Boxing Days for Christmas lunch with his wife and the little girl. A nice bunch of flowers, big box of chocolates. He did things properly, Bernie. It was always good to talk to him, because whatever he said seemed to make very good sense to me, and he explained things very well. He'd tell you something which was very simple, but you didn't realise yourself. And it's such a simple thing, it should have been obvious. And he'd make it clear. I worked for Hamleys for 18 months. I couldn't get a job in the aircraft department, model aircraft, because that was full, so they put me upstairs on the first floor with the Hornby 00 train sets and Meccano. It turned out I was a very good salesman. I had some training from the staff there, one fellow called Terry Brooks from Southampton, little guy, but a brilliant salesman, and he sort of befriended me, and he taught me the basic art of selling, and I did very well, and they gave me my own counter. Just in those days, there was you came in the front door of Hamleys, and there was a staircase leading up to the first floor, and I had a section there when Scalextrics just came out, and the slot racing cars. And they gave me that counter. I set up there, and I did very well. I had a boy of 20 under me to get the stock from the stock room, and I would do the selling. And I remember one day the manager came down, Mr. Reynolds from the 5th floor, and he walked up to me one day, and he said, Mr. Nathan, I believe you've taken £100 yesterday in sales. I said, yes, Mr. Reynolds, that's correct. He said, well, that's extraordinary. That was a lot of money there. I mean, the sets were £5 each, or whatever they were in those days. And he said, how did you do it? I said, by selling, Mr. Reynolds, by selling. And he said, and he walked off. After Hamleys, into my father's business. I stayed at Hamleys for 18 months, and I decided that it was there was a lot of sort of pettiness going on there, and vying for other people's jobs and trying to get in a better position, and I didn't like the sort of scene at all. I thought it was all small-minded, and so I left and went to work for my father. He had 5 showrooms around London, one in Wembley, one in Dagenham, one in Ilford, one in Streatham, one in Brixton. The Brixton branch he gave to my brother for his 21st birthday present, and the one in Wembley, we had a Mercedes agency there, and we used to get the cars on sale or return from Mercedes. I went to work for my father, I think, when I was 16 and a half, and we weren't selling any Mercedes. We're talking here of 1958 or 9, because there was a lot of anti-German feeling. And it's still sort of 10, 12 years after the war, and people didn't want to buy German things. And I remember he got Mercedes on the phone and he said, come and take your bloody cars away, nobody wants them. Which they did. But had he had the agency some years later, it would have been an absolute gold mine. It was called Henry Nathan and Sons when I came in. It was originally Sons. My older brother John, he left the Air Force. He worked in the headquarters in Uxbridge during his national service. So it was Henry Nathan and Son, and when I joined, it was Henry Nathan and Sons. But at 16, when people came in to buy cars, they didn't want to talk to a 16-year-old boy. I was very much a boy. And so I ended up running errands. We had our own workshops. When parts were needed, I'd have to go to the Ford dealership or the Roots Hillman Imp dealership, whatever it was, and stand in the queue, always long queues for parts, and to get a bearing or something or other. And you wait an hour in the queue, get to the counter. Out would come this massive book with the drawings of each part in the book, each page, because they didn't have those microfiche films then. Go through the page, found the part, got a number, off you go back into the stores. Sorry mate, out of stock. And so that was, sort of half a day gone and done nothing, and so stand around. And I didn't like that actually. I got very bored. Was never really interested in the car business as such. When I had the Healey, I was standing in the showroom one day talking to one of the salesmen, a fellow called Douglas Powell, at the head office in Leytonstone. And he said to me, "Why don't you race your Healey?" And I looked at him, I thought, I said, "I don't know." I said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "Well, in my youth I used to race MGs, and you should race that car if you're interested." I said, "Well, how do I go about doing that?" He said, "Well, go to the RAC, apply for your competitions licence, and then join one of the clubs, the British Racing Sports Car Club or the British Automobile Racing Club, one of the clubs, and apply for a race meeting, and if you're accepted, I'll come down and show you the ropes." So we applied for the meeting, went to Brands Hatch, had a pair of plimsolls, bought a crash helmet of course, a set of racing tyres which I bought from Dunlop at half price. I think they were £20 and I got them for £10 each. Dunlop's had a depot then in Euston Road in Albany Street. Went through the mysteries of scrutineering, so I learned a bit about cars then, and what needs to be done, what shouldn't be done. Went out to practice, and I thought that it would be a good idea to take a tight inside line all the way around the track, thinking, well, like a running track, if I cover less distance, I'll go faster. But of course, that was totally wrong. But I knew nothing at all. I didn't even know what a Lotus was. I thought a Lotus was some sort of oriental flower. After practice, I went back in the paddock and the track manager came over. And he said, "Son," he said, "do you mind if I tell you something?" I said, "No." I said, "What is it?" Thinking I'd done something wrong. And he said, "Come with me. We'll go on that stand at Paddock Bend. I want to show you something." So I said, "Well, okay." Went to the stand at Paddock Bend. And he said, "You see these 3 cars coming down the straight? Watch them go through Paddock Bend, and watch the last car, the way he takes the corner, which was the hairpin, or Druid's corner." And I watched the car, and it went on the outside of the track, the left-hand side before the corner, after going up the hill to Druid's, cut the apex, and drifted out on the outside coming out of the corner. And he said, "That's what you've got to do." He said, "It's no good taking a close inside line all the time. You've got to try and straighten the corner up and make as much of a straight line of it as you can. Yes, you'll go faster that way." I said, "Well, thank you very much." That basically is how I started motor racing, but I did manage to finish up second without any accidents, apart from a quite frightening spin at Paddock Bend when I decided to try using the overdrive, which was a little toggle switch on the right-hand side of the dash, thinking I again could save time and not changing gear. That's what caused me to spin off at Paddock Bend. And in those days, Paddock was quite a fearsome bend. There was no runoff at all. I mean, there was the track and then there was an earth bank. And you take that bend probably at 90 miles an hour if you were quick. I wasn't quick, so I'd maybe taking it 80. But if you came off and you hit the bank, you were going to write the car off, at the very least. Having looked around the paddock and seen the other cars, finding the Healey was quite a lump of machinery to throw around Brands Hatch. Talking to people, they said, "Well, that's no good for racing." He said, "It's a very good valley car, that Healey, but what you want if you want to race is a Lotus Elite." And that day, Bernie Ecclestone came down to the circuit with us. My mother and father were there, obviously. I was 17 years old. We went back to tea at Bernie's house in Bexley Heath. And I was with a friend of mine called Alvin, who lived locally. He was a sort of helper. And we were quite scruffy. We were messing about with the car, and grease on our hands and things. Went back to Bernie's house. And before tea, we went into the bathroom to wash up. And this house was absolutely immaculate. Went into the bathroom and he's got these gleaming white towels on the towel racks. I mean, we couldn't get the grease off with the soap, so we wiped them on the towel. There's grease marks all over the black grease on the towels. And Bernie showed us around the house and he was chatting and he said, this is my sort of den. And he said, I got it just the colour I want. And it was a sort of plum colour. And then he said he made him repaint it 6 times until he got the exact shade of plum he wanted. I remember that. Because that wouldn't have occurred to me to paint the wall 6 times, you know, to get the colour, the exact shade. Interesting. Perfectionist. We sold the Healy, by the way, is it done 5,000 miles and we paid £800 for it. And it was like brand new. And anyway, that was sold, and we went to Taylor Crawley in South Audley Street. They had a showroom there on the corner of South Audley Street and Park Street. And he bought from Bobby Day, who owned the place at the time, this 1961 Series 1 White Elite, registration Mark 8 MPG, 8 mile per gallon, or whatever you want to call it. And that was an interesting little car. Well, it was a perfectly standard road car. I think we paid £1,900 for it, from memory. Single SU carburettor, no seatbelts, of course, people didn't have seatbelts in those days. And it was quite quick because it was light and it handled wonderfully, which after the heavy Healy, it was quite an experience. And it would go around corners very fast, and it would stop quickly too. Obviously, less weight to stop. When you went to shut the door, no matter how hard or soft you tried to close it, it wouldn't lock on the second catch. The first catch would go, so it would be slightly ajar, but it wouldn't catch on the second. So it wouldn't shut properly, in other words. We tried to cure this, we couldn't cure it. And Dad said, well, this is no good. He said we should take this back to Lotus, because they were just up the road at Chestnut, which is not far from Leytonstone. So he said, I'll come with you and we'll sort this out. Because he couldn't drive around the door half a jar, it was ridiculous. The car cost nearly £2,000. You could buy a house for that in those days. Over to Chestnut, we were seen by one of the people there, and he said, well, give us a few minutes, we'll try and adjust it. Half hour later, he said, we can't do this. He said, you have to leave it. And Dad was no slacker. He'd come out of the army, he was quite a tough old fellow. What have you got to do? He said, we just paid £2,000 for this car, it's nearly new, and the door won't close. He said, it's not good enough. He said, you built the car. He said, you put it right. He meant what he said, and they could see that. So they took the car into the workshops, and 2 hours later it came out with a whole new sort of fiberglass panel in with the lock completely repositioned, and it shut. That car took it to race, and I found the other elites were shooting past me on the straight. They were much faster around the corners and disappearing on the straight. And I thought, well, there's something wrong with my car. Back into the paddock, looking at the other cars. I spoke to one of the mechanics who worked for Team Elite, Ron Bennett, and they were painted white with green stripes. They were very successful. And Ron kindly said to me, very kindly told me, he spent some time, he said, well, he said, I hear your problem. He said, but, you know, what stage engine, what stage development have you got on the engine? I said, well, it's just out the factories. He said, well, that's stage 1. He said, there's 4 stages to modify these for racing, which I knew nothing about. I mean, first thing you do, you throw away the single SU carburettor manifold and put on twin Weber carburettors. The whole engine has to be stripped down. The flywheel has to be lightened and all the rods and crank balanced. The fibre timing gear needs to be changed for steel. You need to increase the compression ratio, fit a 4-branch exhaust manifold. I mean, it was like double Dutch to me. I never heard of these things before. So I realised that I couldn't do this. And our workshops couldn't do it, because we had all the mechanics, they wouldn't know how to do those kind of things. We searched around, and the name Willie Griffiths came up. Now, Willie was Graham Hill's mechanic at Team Lotus when he was driving F1 for Lotus. And he left and started small workshops around the back of Sloane Square, which you never do today, because, I mean, the rent would be enormous. So he had this little garage with some racing cars in there and around the back of Sloane Square. I went to see Willie, and I told him what's happened. He said, OK, well, I can do this for you. 3 weeks later, I went to pick up the car. I had a race at Aintree, and he showed me how to start it, because Weber's, there's no choke. Well, there is a choke, but it wasn't connected on the Weber's. He said, you've got to pump the throttle. And I drove it up the M1 to Aintree with a friend of mine. It still wasn't very fast on the straights. So I went back to Willie. I said, this is no good. I said, cars are still passing me on the straight. And he said, let's have a look at it. And he went out into the street, Because those days you could work in the street on the cars in the street. Nobody would stop you. You did oil changes and all sorts in the street, over a drain. He started it up, and he fiddled about with the sparking plugs, and he took some leads off. And he said, it's only on 3 cylinders. I said, oh. He said, have you been pumping the throttle too much to start it? I said, well, possibly. And what I'd done, I'd actually, before I went to Aintree, I'd started it, I flooded it. I'd over-pumped the throttle, and I wet up one plug, which didn't clear. So I drove all the way to Aintree on 3 cylinders without knowing it. Of course, it wouldn't go fast. Anyway, he took the plug out and cleaned it and put it back in, and it just transformed the car. It was a big deal, I mean. 3 cylinders of 4. Especially with a high compression engine, 1 cylinder's out, it's going to slow you down. It's a big difference. And then I entered some more races, and I began to pick up the odd 2nd place, the odd 3rd place. I think I had a couple of wins, and I was getting quicker. But I still wasn't fast. I was at Snetterton one day, probably 62, late 61, early 62. And at that time, Graham Warner was driving the Elite for the checkered flag, which he owned. It was called LOV1 Love 1, a famous Elite. Well, there were 2. There was Love 1 and there was Les Leston's car, DAD10 Daddy-O. The red one with the white stripes on the front. They were the 2 quickest cars. And I went past the pits at Snetterton on the outside, getting ready to turn right into Sear, which I foot flat out on the throttle. And I started to brake. And then I suddenly saw this white Elite charge by me on the inside, still accelerating. It went into Sear, and I saw the driver tweak the thing, it put it into a different, it was drifting around Sear corner about 90 miles an hour, and I was watching it. Then he put his hand out the window and waved to me. That was Graham Warner. So I realised that I'm still not doing this right. But some months later, I was able to do the same thing. I began to get very quick. By 1963, I was winning most races, getting the odd lap record. And in fact, during 63, I got maximum points and won the National Autosport Championship at 20 years old then. And I was the youngest driver ever to win that at the time. In fact, I was the youngest driver racing. Because, I mean, Fangio never started, he was 39. I started at 17.
The Elite may have been more successful than the Healey, but it was also the cause of Roger's first big off, caused by a broken drive shaft. He says that he'd love to share the memory of what happened, but the fact is, all he can recall is being on track and then getting the fright of his life when he woke up in the back of an ambulance with a woman holding a needle taking his trousers down.
I never had any particular call to go motor racing, but I think having started, it was just, I mean, being sort of 17 years old, it was very interesting. It was a challenge. And when you did do well and you won, it was very exciting. It was very satisfying. It was a big thrill. Very fortunate being able to do it, thanks to my father. Because I couldn't afford a car for £2,000. When I was working for Hamleys, my salary was £3, 5 shillings a week. It wasn't much more with Dad, but at least I got a car out of it. During the Elite time, Bernie was running an Elva Formula Junior, and Chris Steele was looking after it. It was a red thing with a black stripe on. Dad said, perhaps we should buy this and you can race a single-seater. I said, oh, fine, that's fine. And so we bought the car for £800 with a whole bay Ford engine in, 1 litre Ford. And Bernie said, well, you can come and try it at Brands Hatch. Make sure you like it. It was fair enough. So we went down to Brands. Chris was there, Bernie was there. I was sitting in the car looking at the wheels going around the corners and turning and seeing the wheels go from left to right, which you can do with an open wheeler, and seeing the sort of the nose of the car and the wheels moving. I found this absolutely fascinating. I was intrigued by it. They said, you did a very good time there. You know, you said you were the fastest thing on the track. I said, I don't know. I said, well, I'm glad anyway. I thought perhaps they were kidding me to try and get the car sold, to tell me I'd gone fast, but I had gone fast apparently. But I said to Bernie, only one thing, Bernie, I noticed going around Paddock Bend, the oil pressure was dropping. I said, is it supposed to do that? He said, what's it dropping to? I said, well, about £25. Oh, he said, that's all right. But it wasn't, in fact, all right. Because when I took it to Mallory Park, you got that long bend, Gerrard's Corner, I was getting huge oil surge in that, and the engine blew up. And that's not nice at all, being towed back into the pits. I didn't like that. It felt very ignominious. So got back home and Dad phoned Bernie and said, well, his engine's blown up. He said, you know, I said, the oil pressure went down. I said, it was doing that at Brands. You said it was all right. I said, well, it's not, it's blown up now. And anyway, they argued, and eventually Bernie chipped in £200 to buy and get the engine rebuilt, which John Reed did at Holbay, which is up in Ipswich at the time. But it was a horrible car. It had drum brakes, 15-inch wheels, and it wasn't a nice car to drive at all. I didn't like it. Although I did get placed once or twice with it, fairly near the front, but the Lotus 18s were a far better car. And so we sold that. In fact, Keith Holland bought it and just carried on with the Elite to win the Autosport Championship, at which time BP took an interest in me. And I remember they took me to a very nice restaurant in London called Le Coq d'Or, and had a good lunch, and he said, well, what are your plans for next year? And I said, well, I fancy going down to see Jack Brabham, because I believe he's going to build a new sports car called a BT8 with a Coventry Climax engine. I think I'd like to go sports car racing. He said, well, fine. He said, we'll go along with that. We'll give you a bit of help. And they actually gave me a retainer. Not a huge amount, but it wasn't bad at the time, though. It was certainly better than nothing. And obviously we got oil free, and Champions used to give free plugs, and Dunlops would give you a few bob off the tyres. And the plugs were £1 each anyway, so it was no big deal, but it's all helpful. It was nice. So we decided to go down and see Jack Brabham and talk to him about the new sports car. Went down again with Dad and Bernie. It's a new Hall, where Jack was based at the time. This was November 1963. Met Ron Taranac and Jack Brabham, and went into the office, and we discussed the car. There was a choice of engines. You could either have the Formula 1 2.5 Climax engine, the 2.7 litre engine, the Climax engine. He said, well, that's not quite so reliable. Or there's the new 2 litre short stroke FPF engine. We chose the 2 litre FPF because that seemed to be the thing that Brabham was pushing. In hindsight, I should have gone for the 2.5 because it was a lot quicker, a lot more powerful. Anyway, that came later. So we discussed price, and he said the car's £3,500 and £50 extra for the clutch. I'm not quite sure why the clutch was £50 extra and why he priced it like that. It could be to do with purchase tax, because if you bought the car with certain things off, it was classed as a kit car and you didn't pay purchase tax. I think that's what it was. Anyway, it was £3,550 for this brand new 2 litre Brabham Climax. And Ron said he could get it by April. I said, well, it's not really quick enough, Ron. The season starts in March. I was keen to get going. He said, well, I can't do it before April. I said, okay, fine, April it is. And we shook hands, and as we came out of the office, I saw a picture of a Formula 1 car on the wall. And I didn't recognise it. So I said to Jack, I said, well, what's that Formula 1 car, Jay? He said, well, it's our new Formula 1 car for next year. I said, oh. I said, how much is it? He said, it's £5,000. At that moment, Bernie and I had eye contact. And you know, one of those split-second things, obviously both thinking the same thing. We just bought a sports car for £3,500 or £3,550, and for another £1,500 odd, or less, we can go get a Grand Prix car. I mean, the money was there, it wasn't a problem. And then something happened, either there was a shout from the workshop or the moment passed. It was forgotten. But I often think I should have gone for that Formula 1 car. At the end of April, the Brabham was finished. I think it was delivered on, or we picked it up on the 30th of April. Took it down to Goodwood to try it, and it scared the pants off me. This thing would not go around corners. I mean, it was hugely quick. I mean, compared to the Elite, it was like a rocket. And you know, driving an open sports 2 litre racing car compared to what was a sports saloon, big difference. And it was a quantum leap. But it wouldn't handle. And going around the corner, it would suddenly dart off to the outside of the circuit. And the brakes were terrible. And I didn't know enough to be able to sort these problems out. And Willie was there with me one day, and we were at Goodwood. And Graham Hill was there. He said, well, would you like me to ask Graham to drive it? Perhaps he can give you an idea, or give us an idea what's wrong with it. Well, I said, please, Willie, because I don't know what's wrong with the car. It's beyond me. Graham agreed, jumped in the car. I mean, we didn't have seatbelts and things in those days. In fact, it was better to get thrown out. I'll tell you a story which is worth remembering. If you're in an open car and you come off the track and it rolls over, it goes light, dark as it rolls over. Always let go in the dark. That way you won't get crushed when you come out of the car and you're thrown out. You never know when it can come in handy. An open car, let go in the dark, you're rolling over like that. Anyway, so Graham, he jumped in the car, went out and did half a dozen laps, came back into the paddock, and then I'm standing there. Willie's off somewhere else. I don't know where he's gone. Probably going to get a beer. And Graham started to walk away. I said, "Excuse me, Graham." He turned around and looked at me. He was very stony-faced. He said, "What is it?" I said, I want to know what's wrong with the car. I said, "What do you think?" He said, "It's no good." I said, "I know it's no good. I want to know what's wrong with it." He said, "If I were you, I'd take it back to the makers," which I did. I phoned up Ron when we got back home, and I said, "Ron, Graham Hill's driven your car," and I said, "It's no good." And Ron said, "Oh, you shouldn't have given it to Graham to drive." I said, "Well, somebody's got to drive it, because I can't sort it out." And I said, what are you going to do? So he very kindly arranged for Jack Brabham to fly down in his aircraft from Fair Oaks and meet me at Goodwood the following week and to test the car with me. And I actually had although I didn't think of it at the time this way, but it was actually an honour and a privilege to test with the world champion for half a day at Goodwood in my car. And I learned more from driving with Jack on that day and watching him work to change the car and modify it and do various bits and adjustments than I had since I started racing. He sorted the brakes out quite quickly. That was to do with the mechanism. It had a balance bar in, which I didn't know about because the Elite was just a single pedal. So we had this balance bar with the two master cylinders. He set that up properly. Brakes were cured, fine, no problem at all braking. But it still didn't go around corners very well. So he did some tweaking and shock absorber work and raising the height a bit and stiffening the anti-roll bars. And it was better. He got down to 1 minute 28 was his time. Then he came back into the paddock and he said, "You have a go now, see what you think." So I jumped in. And it was a lot better, and the brakes were fine, brakes were fantastic. It was a lot better cornering, but it still didn't feel right, it was still a bit scary. But when I came back, I was actually 2 seconds a lap slower than Brabham, which disappointed me. He could see when I pulled into the pits, the look on my face, I wasn't happy. And he said, "Don't worry, Roger," he said, "you've lost confidence in the car." He said, "Just get used to the car, and you'll do better." And as we were walking back, he said, he said it's a fine car. He said it's probably the quickest 2-litre sports car in the country, but it is difficult to drive. I'm thinking, I was scratching my head thinking, well, if the world champion finds it difficult to drive, it doesn't help me very much. So what I learned from Jack testing that day, and what I thought I'd do from my own experience by this time, I increased the rear track, put on some wider rear wheels, much stronger front springs, and a rear spoiler. Because spoilers, they were just about coming in at that time. People didn't know much about spoilers. Put the rear spoiler on, and the car flew. It transformed the car completely. It was great. Good brakes, good cornering, fast, good-looking car too. I went to Silverstone and won the International Martini Trophy, which was 50 laps on the Grand Prix circuit. Got a new lap record of an average 105 miles an hour, which was very quick in those days. It was almost the same as the Formula 1 time. Won that. Went to Snetterton the next day. Won again there, another lap record. It just won off race after race and records everywhere. Well, I was very fortunate in having, at that time, sports car racing was very popular. There was Jimmy Clark, there was Graham Hill, there was John Surtees, Bruce McLaren, there was Dan Gurney. I raced all those guys. In my book, I got a wonderful grid picture. I'm on the grid with 5 world champions. I'm near the front, but I had a 2-litre car. McLaren or Clark was in pole in the Lotus 30, or the McLaren, whatever it was, the Zurich Special, I think he drove it in those days. I mean, when I think back, I didn't think at the time, when I think back today, what a privilege to be able to drive with those people of that calibre of skill. I mean, wonderful. But at the time, it was sort of feeling like it was a normal happening. Looking back, it was a great privilege. I'm very thankful that I had the honour to drive with those great guys. They were almost godlike creatures of infinite skill. The Brabham, I competed for a full season. Well, there were 2 seasons, in fact. The first season with the climax. The problem was having the 2-litre engine. I was up against people like Clark in the Lotus 30, which was 4.7 litre, McLaren with a similar size engine, and the Ferraris of Graham Hill, and they had their 3 litre V12s. So it was quite hard to get overall wins against cars of more than double my capacity. The Tourist Trophy in 1964, when I was on the grid with the 5 world champions in the 2 litre Brabham, Dan Gurney was behind me in the 7 litre Daytona Cobra, because my time overall was faster. He was obviously a lot faster on the straight, but I was far quicker on corners. And he out-dragged me at the start of the race into the first corner. And I had great difficulty trying to pass Dan Gurney in this 7 litre Cobra. On the straight, he was in front now. He pulled out quite a long distance, and I catch up on braking for the next corner, and I couldn't get round him. And this went on for several laps, and it was frustrating me, because I should have been in front. Well, you try getting around Dan Gurney in this 7 litre Cobra, it's not easy. And he didn't make it any easier, that's for sure. But eventually I got by him and I pulled away, and it was fine. There was another time at Mallory Park where I finished third to Jimmy Clark, and I went on the podium with him. And used to get champagne in those days. We never shook the bottle and wasted it. We drank it out of silver cups. It was lovely. I wasn't even the drinker at the time, but that tasted like nectar. It was a fantastic feeling. And Jimmy was a lovely guy, charming fellow, a gentleman. I got a very good picture of him, in fact, which is in my book, where I'm dicing with him and Denny Halm in a similar car to mine, with another he had a 2 litre engine too, and Jimmy Clark's on the Works Lotus 30. And we're coming through Bottom Bend, 3 of us side by side into Bottom Bend at Brands Hatch. I also used to race saloon cars in those days, because we were modifying Hillman Imps. We were probably the leading Hillman Imp conversion specialist in the world at the time. And we sent conversions all over the world. We did complete cars for routes in Venezuela with Chrysler, bought out Hilt routes. And then there was routes in Australia, bought another car from us. To publicise our conversions, I used to race the cars. And the saloon car racing was obviously at club level, which is a different thing altogether to racing with world champions. The Coopers, the Mini Coopers, which at that time were unbeatable, until the Hillman Imps came along, our modified Imps. They were quicker. And I used to race against one man in particular, was a very good driver, Bill McGovern, who some of you may remember. He used to drive the Emery Imp. In one particular race at Brands Hatch, I'm dicing with Bill McGovern. We're coming down the straight, neck and neck. I'm first and second basically. I'm slightly ahead of him. And the cars were sort of coming together on the straight. We're both trying to get into paddock first. McGovern was, at the end of the straight, he had more power than me. So I had to sort of leave my braking too late, really. Just throw it into paddock sideways and get 45 degrees of drift, so he couldn't get round me then, because there was no room to get round me. And then I'd pull away, and this went on lap after lap. And the end of the first heat, we were both summoned to see the clerk of the course. He's saying, "What do you think you're doing?" I was just trying to get into paddock bend first. He said, "You're right in front of the grandstand, your cars were coming together." He said, "You just can't do that." And so we said, "Oh, sorry, Nick, we'll try and be more careful." And then he sort of calmed down, and he said, "Well, if you've got to do it," he said, "do it around the back where no one can see you. Don't do it in front of the grandstand." But I didn't like that, because in saloon car racing that was quite common. People were running the back of you and braking, and then smash your lights, and they come into contact quite often. And that was, to me, completely unprofessional. I mean, you never do it with the likes of when you're racing with world champions. It just wasn't done. And for that reason, I didn't want to race saloons anymore. I considered it was bad form. And so I sort of stopped driving saloons, and Gordon Jones took over driving the Imps. I stopped working for father. Once I won the Autosport Championship, I stopped working for him, because we were quite busy racing pretty well every weekend. I wasn't interested in the motor business as such. I didn't enjoy it. What we'd done by then, the workshop in Brixton, the showroom in Brixton had a workshop in Plato Road, quite near a pub called the Hope and Anchor, which we frequented. I ran the workshops as my team headquarters, and there was also the workshop for the showroom cars, which didn't mix. It was a nuisance. In fact, there was this continual conflict, which has priority. Obviously, I wanted the racing cars to have priority, but my brother wanted his sales to have priority, so that was a constant problem there with the mechanics and who's going to work on which car. Anyway, so for 1963, I was working independently. You got the free oil and you got the cheaper tires, but it still cost a lot of money. Unless you had the money, you couldn't go racing. And when you won, I mean, On the entry forms for these club events, you had a choice of either, if you won the race, you had a tenner, second place was £5, or you could have a pewter mug. And that was your choice for winning. And you tick the box which you wanted, and I always I wasn't interested in £5 or £10, I always ticked for the mug, pewter mugs, trophies. And I ended up, with several cupboards full like that, full of pewter mugs, and that's just the remnants. You couldn't make any money out of it, it was not possible. The only people that made money then were the top half a dozen. Even then, it wasn't huge money. I believe that Jimmy Clark was on a retainer from Esso when he was world champion of £20,000 a year. Then once I started the imp conversions in the workshop, I was able to support it myself through the imp conversions, selling imp conversions, and working on other people's Lotus Elites. That's how I met Max Mosley. He had a Lotus Elite at the time, and he brought it into me for maintenance, which I did. That's how I became friendly with him, because he wrote the foreword of my latest book shortly before he unfortunately died. What I wanted was more outright wins, and with a 2-litre engine up against 4.7, that's not possible in most cases. We got to know Billy Mitchell, who was a director of General Motors in America, because Chrysler bought out Roots. He offered us an aluminium block Oldsmobile engine of 4.5 litres, which they made specially for possible competition use. They weren't available generally, and they normally had armed blocks. So we thought, well, if we buy one of those, I come to know Frank Costin at the time, the area nemesis, who did the Vanwell body and was helped in the Lotus Elite body as well, and many other things like that, and a former employee of de Havilland's. Frank offered to install this engine, the V8 engine, in the Brabham. So over the winter of '64, he did the installation. We took the car down to Goodwood in the beginning of '65 to test it, and we had all sorts of problems, a lot of problems. The main problem was oil surge. It was a dry sump engine. Sort of 6-7 months later, we never completely cured that oil problem, the surging. The engine wasn't very good, in fact, because the person that Billy Mitchell suggested modify it to racing spec, they were a firm of plumbers somewhere in the Midwest. I mean, he didn't mean to do it, but he obviously had a friend there and thought he was a good guy. But they weren't professional there, and the conversion was poorly done. So we had endless blow-ups, endless problems with it. But when it went on 1 or 2 occasions without problems, it just blew everything off. I had a race at Euston, which was an RAF airfield in Newcastle upon Tyne. And every year that was open for the Euston Gold Cup. And we just finished rebuilding the engine for the umpteenth time, as it had blown up again. And we kept getting it welded. I think the block had more weld on than the original aluminium. We didn't have time to put it on the dynamometer or to run it in. As it was a sports racing car, I decided to drive it all the way to Newcastle on the road and run it in at the same time. Because we had lights on the sports car, we put tray plates on, and I stayed in the other pair of goggles and drove it up the A1 all the way to Newcastle. I remember it was summertime, it was June, and I got stuck in a huge traffic jam between Biggleswade and Baldock. And of course, with a racing car standing still, I had to keep switching off because it got hot. There was no fan to cool it. And when it got cool, I get back on the road and start driving again, and got to Newcastle eventually. But I was having a problem with the oil plugs, the spark plugs oiling up, not wetting up. They were getting oil on them through the bores somehow. Engine problems were endless. And I realised that once the plug got wet, I couldn't clear it. But I noticed in this, while driving, if I could start it and get it on 8 cylinders without idling, it wouldn't oil up plugs. If it idled even for a short time, it would wet up one of the plugs and it wouldn't clear. So this was a problem, because I had to start the car on the 1-minute signal and without actually loading the engine very much, and it would have a plug. And so what I decided to do, I started at the back of the grid because we had all these problems. So there's quite a lot of cars started, about 30 odd cars. I'm right at the back of the grid. And what I decided to do was not start off at the 1-minute signal, and as soon as the flag came down, start it and immediately load it so it wouldn't wet up a plug, which I did, and it worked. I managed to get it going on 8 cylinders for a change. And I stormed through the field, the entire field of cars, won the race outright, and broke the outright circuit record, and won the Euston Gold Cup. So, I mean, one thing it did, it proved that what I wanted to do worked. I just had a bad engine, unlucky. Sold that very quickly to a hill climb chappie who disappeared over a hill somewhere and never saw him again. At that time, Frank Costin had come into our workshops in Brixton, and he spoke to Willie because he knew Willie from Lotus. And he said that I'm thinking of building this new lightweight sports car, and I'm looking for a suitable engine. And Woody said, well, I've got just the one for you. He said, go over there, pick up the engine on the bench and bring it over here. And Frank said, don't be silly, Willie. He said, Frank, he said, go over there and pick it up. It was the aluminium engine. All die-cast aluminium, it only weighed 115 pounds with all the bits and bobs on. Amazing little engine. Frank went over there and he picked it up and he was amazed. He said, this is ideal, just what I want. So they got talking, we discussed with Frank. He told us about his new project. Would we be interested in supplying engines, modified imp engines to race specification to put in his cars? So Dad sort of said, well, why don't we work with you and build the cars together? I said, oh, that's an idea. He said, well, come and see the car. At that time, he was working on the side of a mountain in Wales, Frank, in Llanberis, a little village called Cwmaglaw. He had a sort of lean-to workshop outside a bakery. So we drove to Wales in midwinter, tried to get over the pass at Llanberis, couldn't get over the pass because it was snowed in. And I had to drive all the way back down this mountain in reverse at night, not getting stuck in the snowdrift, which I managed to do. Took the coastal road, which was clear. I went and saw this wooden car, because the whole monocoque was made of wood. Frank, having worked for de Havilland, was full of mosquito ideas and built wooden cars. Well, Marcos was partially wood, because Frank helped design the first Marcos. That's where you got the name from, Jem Marsh, Frank Costin, Marcos. Anyway, so we saw this wooden monocoque and it all looked good and Frank's full of ideas and he was a very clever guy, he was a boffin. So we decided, yes, okay, we'll build the cars in London. Frank would supply the monocoques. We would build the cars in London, because at that time I'd been joined by Cedric Selzer. Now Cedric was Jimmy Clark's mechanic at Team Lotus when he was world champion. And Cedric joined me in the company. We started in the old Team Lotus premises in Fortis Green, Linton Garage. So the idea was that Cedric would help build these cars and Frank would supply the monocoques. And we advertised them, like orders came in. We had a works car, the first one that Frank built, the prototype, and that was due to be shown at the Dorchester Hotel in Park Lane on just before Christmas in 1965. And the day before the show, we haven't even seen the car yet. Frank's not finished building it. I mean, typical motor racing of the day, it's all last minute stuff. And eventually late in the day, Frank turns up with Ronnie, his son, a clever young man, and we worked all the rest of the day, all night, and we actually painted the car at the same time, working on it, had no paint on the car, and we got it to the Dorchester Hotel at 9 o'clock in the morning, looking quite good. It's amazing if you've got the right team around you, what you can do. Car was there, a lot of interest. Sterling Moss came, Jack Fairman came, a lot of other celebrities in the newspapers. Good start. The idea was I would race the prototype and hopefully win it to get sales, which I did. First time out, we went to Brands Hatch. John Bolster came down to do a track test the same day. The car went very well. He shattered that record. First time out with a hack engine. And then John Bolster drove it, gave us a very good write-up, gave a very good review, and the orders started coming in. But then we found we weren't getting the monocoques from Frank. I probably had half a dozen orders initially, then it went to a dozen, and there's no monocoques. And Frank was the only guy that could make the monocoques. We could do the metal work, the chassis, the tubular space frames that went on the back and on the front of the monocoques. We could make the aluminium tanks, because we had aluminium metal workers with us who came from the aircraft industry. One guy in particular was very good, Peter Hingerton. He could weld anything. He later started Grand Prix Metalcraft, which you may remember, in Tottenham. Peter was a fantastic guy. We had some very good people with me. And one race in particular, I had an agent in France called Dr. Moloff, Dmitry Moloff. Very nice old boy. Spoke fluent German, French, Russian, English. And I said to him one day, Doctor, I said, your German's very good. I said, he said, well, so will yours be if you were occupied by the Germans twice. And he was a good old boy. He sold lots of cars, and he said, can you come and race the car in France? Because nobody really knows about you or the car in France. I can sell more cars. I said, sure. I said, you apply for a race, and I'll come over and we'll see what we can do. So he applied for an entry for Montlhéry. It was an international event, international status event, and it was qualifying for the European Sports Car Championship. And Abarth were leading at the time with the Austrian driver Johann Ortner. So I went over there with one mechanic, my Commer van, and the car on the trailer. Got to Montlhéry, never driven on the bank circuit before. It was concrete banking. and went through scrutineering. And at scrutineering, we took the body off, and of course all this wooden car was exposed, a complete wooden monocoque, which people hadn't seen before. And the Fiat team manager came over, I remember his name, Senor Avidano, with a colleague. They looked at the car, and touching the wood, knocking at it, and then he sort of kicked the rear tire and went off laughing. I knew what they were thinking. English driver, one mechanic, car on the trailer, built his own wooden car up against us, Fiat. They got the Ferrari transporter there, there were 30 mechanics and 5 cars. I mean, it was laughable. I mean, it was a joke. Anyway, went out to practice. I never driven on the bank circuit before. A bit strange because you hit these the bumps on the concrete, and the thing jumped up a yard, and it was bottoming also, which made it worse. I didn't want to break any of this the mounting points or the suspension, so I pulled it back into the pits, asked Tony the mechanic to change. Tony came from Somerset, West Country boy. I said, put some stiffer front springs on, the ones painted red, increase the ride height by ½ inch at the front, put some more bump rubbers on the shock absorber, and stiffen the rear anti-roll bar a little bit. Went out again. In those days I could learn a circuit in 10, 12 laps, no problem. I mean, now it probably take me 100 laps to learn the circuit. Anyway, learnt the circuit, put in what I thought was a good time, and Dr. Molov came running over, looking very excited, waving a piece of paper. He always called me Mr. Nathan, and I always called him Dr. Molov. He was always very formal. We knew each other for years. Anyway, and he said, look, Mr. Nathan, look at this. I said, what is it, Lord? He said, we've got fastest time. I said, oh, good. Well, I expected to get fastest time, because I knew what the car could do. But he didn't. Anyway, next thing you know, the 2 Fiat guys, Senor Avidano and his mate, came over to look at the car. They weren't laughing this time, I can tell you. They were looking very down in the mouth. But what happened was, people thought it was a mistake, a timekeeping mistake, because in those days there was no electronic timing. The timekeepers had these stopwatches on a board. You click them with your fingers as the car flashes by. And if they missed one, or they, do it now, and the times they varied. So they thought it was a timekeeper's error. But nonetheless, that was the time I was given, so I got pole position on the grid. But my problem was, the Fiats had much more powerful engines than me. Well, it was the same CC. They had a huge development facility with Fiat behind them. And they were actually faster on the straight. And I knew I had to get into the first corner, which was a right-hander after the start, first. If any one of the Fiats got in front of me, they'd have blocked me off. Orton would have got in front, and I wouldn't have seen them. They'd gone down the straight after the bend, I would never see them again. I managed to make a good start, which I didn't always do. Just the right amount of wheel spin, just the right amount of throttle, got it, and it shot off. Initially, because my car was much lighter, it was probably 200 pounds lighter than the Abarth with the wooden monocoque and the die-cast aluminium engine and transaxle. I was able to put out a slight lead. As we got closer to 100 miles an hour, the Abarth started to overhaul me, and I could see from my peripheral vision on my left eye that this red car coming up alongside. By this time, we passed the braking point. It was just about to get, and all of a sudden, he's gone. He couldn't stand it anymore. He put the brakes on. I went into the corner. We both did, but he was behind me. I went in far too quick because we're both desperate to get into this corner first. The thing started to go. The back came out. At 45 degrees of drift, I'm sliding towards the outside. I got full lock on. I'm tickling the throttle and tweaking the wheel as much as I can to try and hold this slide and stop it coming off the circuit. At that moment, I took a split-second look in the mirror, which I could do. I could do things very quickly then and take it all in. And I saw that the cars behind had backed off, thinking I'm going to have one monumental accident and didn't want to get involved. But I held it. That was the difference. I didn't come off. I fall off down the straight. They couldn't catch me. I won by a mile. You couldn't see them in the end at all. They were a long way behind. Won the race outright, got the lap record, and then came back, and there were television cameras there, which we didn't have in the UK in those days. Television cameras, a big bouquet of flowers from 2 pretty girls. Went round for a lap of honour with one girl in the passenger seat, the other was sitting with her legs over my shoulders, going around the circuit, holding the rollover bar. I didn't drink, but I drank the champagne that day, I can tell you. Enjoyed myself. And then came back into the paddock, and Dr. Molov came running over again, and he wasn't looking so happy this time. I said, "What's the matter, Doctor?" He said, "The Team Abarth are put in a protest to the race stewards that our car is illegal, and therefore we should be disqualified." I said, "Well, what are the grounds for the complaint? What are they saying is wrong with our car?" "They're saying that the windscreen is illegal." I had a perspex screen. So well, let's just get the FIA yearbook out and see what it says for Group 6 sports racing cars, Appendix J. Got it out. I remember what it said. It said the windscreen shall be made of a material of safety glass, which ours wasn't. It was Perspex, or of a material specified by the manufacturer. So it was ambiguous. I was the manufacturer and I specified Perspex. There was a stewards meeting. Abarth was evidently running up and down, shouting and waving his hands. You know how the Italians tend to get excited at such times. And I'm sort of standing there looking at them all, wondering what they're talking about in foreign languages. I don't speak French or Italian, or very little French. Anyway, the stewards couldn't decide because clearly the regulations were ambiguous. So I'd had the prize money by this time, which was a big help. And they wouldn't give me the cup. They said, we're going to refer this to the FIA in Paris for a ruling, because we can't decide. Fair enough, okay. So we went away. And for 6 months, this went on backwards and forwards with the FIA, and lawyers were involved. Eventually, the FIA ruled that I was the rightful winner of the race. I could have the cup, but the points would go to Abarth for the European Sports Car Championship, which I didn't care about, because I wasn't in the championship. I just went there to try and sell cars and win a race. But it shows you how things work. It's politics again. They wanted the points. Anyway, so that was good. We sold a lot of cars through that on the continent. It was a big help. The name Costin-Nathan arrived when we had that meeting with Frank and decided to build the cars. And as he was the builder, he obviously had priority, the designer. We called Costin and Nathan because I was the builder and supplier of the engines. So it was Costin-Nathan. Frank wasn't interested in really in producing things and doing the same thing over and over again. His mind was always thinking ahead and wanting to do something new. And he joined Brian Hart to build that wooden Protoss, a single-seater. And Brian Hart obviously built the engines for it. So I couldn't get the monococks. Taking deposits for the cars from customers, and I had no monococks. Frank didn't want to make them, fine, we'll find somebody else. It wasn't so easy. I went to Vosper Thornycroft, the boat builders, and they said, we can make that, we can make those rather. We'll need to tool up, but you'll need to order at least 100 to make the tooling costs worthwhile. I wanted a dozen monococks, not 100. I couldn't afford 100 anyway. They were expensive. And I had none. And I went around searching for people to make this monocoque, but I couldn't find anybody. And eventually, I went to a firm on Ilpie Island in Twickenham that made the Oxford and Cambridge racing boats, George Sims Racing Boats. Oh, the ideal firm to build wooden monocoques. I saw the manager there. The manager's name, funny enough, he wasn't part of the family, but his name was also George Sims. And he was a very helpful guy. And went in the workshop there. There's about a dozen woodworkers working in monastic calm, this wood workshop, planing away and sanding. Hadn't built cars before. He said, we build boats. I said, well, can you do it? He said, we'll give it a try, yes. So we got geared up, and we managed to get the tooling right, and they built the monococks for us. But the funny thing was there was no road onto the island. There was only a footbridge. And as these monococks are built, they just fitted in between the footbridge walls. We carried these monococks over this footbridge onto the transport and take them back to the works at North London. Some bright spark said, why don't you float them across? We made a total of 18 cars for sure, possibly 19, over a 5-year period, from 66 to 70, well, to 70 really. It's four and a half years. We produced, or Frank designed a GT to go to Le Mans for 1967, which was the same basis as the open car, the wooden monocoque, but it had a roof on and doors, and the rear bodywork was different, with fairings on the side of the doors that went into a very streamlined car. And we sold more GTs than any other model. We went to Le Mans in 1967 for the 24-hour race, but that did not go well for us. We only finished the car 3 weeks before the race, because it was the first GT. The race was in June, and I was thinking of cancelling the entry. But I thought, well, we've all been working day and night to get this finished. Let's not cancel it. Let's go to Snetterton and we'll give it a try and see how we get on. Then I'll make my mind up whether to go to Le Mans or cancel. Went to Snetterton with a hack engine. I did 75 laps. It never missed a beat. It smashed the lap record and it drove beautifully. So I thought, well, we may not last 24 hours, but we might do well and put up a good show. Who knows? So we went ahead, went to Le Mans, As soon as we went out to practice at Le Mans, we got through scrutineering without a problem, which surprised me, because what we were after was the index of thermal efficiency, which the French like to win for their own cars. The Renaults and Little Simcas and things they produced, and Alpines. Anyway, we got through scrutineering and went out to practice, and then trouble started. We have a misfire. We had overheating problems. The brakes were binding. The clutch was slipping. I mean, none of this happened to Snetterton. It just happened. We cured most of the problems. We had metal workers with us, so we found the weak mixture was partly due, misfiring due to the weak mixture. So we put an aluminium sort of cover over the back, which was open, made an airbox of the body to try and get the mixture richer. And that helped, but we couldn't get rid of this misfire. It persisted throughout the whole time we were there. Now there's a story attached to this. When Lucas heard we were going to Le Mans, they offered to come down with their technicians with special high quality aircraft wiring and make the loom up for us, which we agreed to, free of charge, and fine, great, big help, thank you very much. We eventually, all 3 drivers qualified. Mike Beckwith was my co-driver, and a Frenchman called Frank Rorata. He was the 3rd driver. And the car ran for about 4 hours. But interestingly, at night when we were practicing, going down that Mulsanne straight, I get to 150 miles an hour when it was on 4 cylinders in the dark, and it was about a third of the way down the straight, and just sat there at 8,000 RPM going down this Mulsanne straight. There's no lights, no street lights at all, you just got the headlights, and the lights weren't very good on the cars in those days. So I'm sitting there at 150 miles an hour, and I see these lights twinkling in the mirror, and all of a sudden, boom! These Mark IV Fords, 2 of them go by at 230 miles an hour. In pitch darkness. And you can feel the car, my light little car, only weighed 800 pounds, you can feel it sucked into the slipstream, sort of pulled halfway across the track and back again. And I had to sort of steer down to the slipstream, and they're gone. I mean, it was stunning. At the start, you had to run across the circuit and leap into the car. Nobody bothered with seat belts, although they were starting to come into fashion by then. They wanted to get in the car and just drive. Ran across the car and jumped in, and I had a watch on, a stainless steel watch, with an over-center clasp. You just clipped it shut. And as I put my hand, jumped in the panic, I must have twisted my wrist or something. The clasp opened, and the watch fell down over my hand like that, with my hand's on the gear lever. I can't get my hand off the gear lever, because the watch has trapped my hand on the gear lever. I mean, who'd think of a thing like that? I'm a bad omen. Oh dear, well, the things that happened. I mean, there must be so many things that will come to me, I've forgotten about. They come back sometimes. Anyway, I couldn't get the hand off the gear lever, then the bloody car wouldn't start. It wouldn't start at all. It never happened before. Eventually I got it going, did about 4 hours, it began to get dark, and I thought, you know, this is dangerous. I mean, these cars are going by 100 miles an hour faster in the dark. And it was misfiring, so I retired. Best thing to do. It was a faulty wire in that special wire Lucas put in the ignition circuit. You know, special high quality aircraft wire. If you use our own ordinary plastic wire, coupled wire, it would have been fine. What obviously happened, the wire was covered with this cloth covering, and the cover was a clear lacquer or something on the outside. It was a high quality wire. But it must have broken, it must be a faulty wire. It must have broken inside the covering, and sometimes it touched and sometimes it didn't, depending on temperature or which corner you were turning. It kept making contact and disconnecting, probably due to the heat. I mean, a simple thing like that, a piece of wire, all that work involved, effort. Also in 1968, with the GT model, I won 2 national British championships. One was the Tootle Menswear Championship, obviously sponsored by Tootle, and the Motor News GT Championship. I won both outright in the Nathan GT Imp. There were different cars. There was a works car, and there was customers' cars I tried sometimes, and other car. But they were all the same model, so it was allowed. And when I won the final for the Tootle Championship, I was on the podium at Brands Hatch with Jimmy Tarbuck, who presented me with the prize. And he came up with this cardboard box, a Tootle box, and inside was a polyester dressing gown. He had that in one hand and the pewter mug in the other. So we're back to the pewter mug business again. So that was the prize for winning the championship, a polyester dressing gown and a pewter mug. I wouldn't mind it was silk. It wasn't even a silk dressing gown, it was polyester. I mean, you talk about, did I make any money at it? You couldn't make any money at it. But I sold cars, so in that sense, But then again, you ran all the racing cars and the expense of running them, and you still couldn't make money at it. You managed. You did it because it was something which you wanted to do, and it was a great thing to do. I took that Brabham 2-litre car to Aintree in 1964, and won the race outright there. And I went on the podium, a big silver cup for the Daily Mirror trophy, full of cold champagne, and I didn't drink at all in those days. I just drank tonic water or orange juice. I drank the champagne. It was fantastic. And if you imagine, I'm 19 years old, I've won this race, I'm on the podium, all the press are there, I'm having champagne out of a massive silver cup. Fantastic feeling, on top of the world. And you can't give that up so easily.
And I bet you're thinking the same as me. A race car made of wood? I know it was dangerous back then, but surely this was mad, even by the standards of the day.
Well, the theory was that they're very safe because Frank reckoned if you had a crash in it, being as like a box structure would, it would crumple. It wouldn't actually transmit the shock, it would crumple, which is understandable because if you're in a metal chassis, the whole shock is transmitted all through the chassis to the driver. I did crash it once, quite badly, at Brands Hatch. I was on the GP circuit, and I came past the pits, the back of the pits of Brands, turned left, which is, I think the name of the course, but it used to be called South Bank Bend, up on the main straight, and I went into the right-hand corner a bit too quick and lost it. And I spun off at a very high speed. It spun round across the track, and it came back and it hit the earth bank backwards. By this time, as it went over the curve, I was dislodged from my seat. There were no seat belts, so the edge of the seat, when it hit the bag, sort of tended to hit me in the ribs. It really hurt. And the car was crumpled on the rear corner. I couldn't actually drive after that. I had to be driven home because I had terrible back pains from the edge of the seat slammed into my back. But with the car after you built, it was fine. But another time, talking about luck, and these things come to mind, I was racing the sports car, the 1-litre sports car at Castle Coombe, and one of the mechanics, Brian Saunders, nice fellow, he filled the tanks, but he said it took more fuel than usual. He said, it's still not full. I said, well, fill it up, I want the full tanks. And he went back and he put another, he said, I put another gallon. He said, it's still not full. I said, well, leave it. I said, it must be full. Because I couldn't understand how he could put 2 extra gallons in and the thing wasn't full. Anyway, went out to race, came to the first corner, put the brakes on, and there was this sort of whooshing noise, and the car sort of stopped and went forward. Like, what's going on? I'm going around, I got this strong smell of petrol. And every time I put the brakes on, it starts to stop, then there's this whoosh, and then the car wants to go forward again. What's happened? They had a leak in the neck of the tank, and Brian's pouring this petrol in, and it's leaking out into the monocoque, which is a sealed unit, acting like a tank. So he's put about 5-6 gallons extra in, which has gone into the monocoque and is floating around inside the monocoque. So if I put the brakes on, all this fuel is rushing forward, and I can feel it surging. But I mean, can you imagine a wooden car that had an accident and a spark? God dear. The Brabham, when you mention accidents, I took the Brabham Oldsmobile for a supporting race of the British Grand Prix. 6th on the grid. There were 36 cars and I was 6th on the grid. Not again, we had problems with that V8 engine, the Oldsmobile. This Brabham Oldsmobile had 2 18-gallon tanks in it, either side, long pontoon aluminium tanks with big Le Mans filler caps for quick filling. So we had 36 gallons on board. The flag came down, started off, I'm about 6 in line to the corner, came round Beckett's, and all of a sudden I saw this Lotus 19 sideways on with his nose on the wall, stationary across the circuit, the tail sticking out across the circuit. I mean, nothing I could do at that time. It just, because it was quite a tight corner, that one, well, it's quite fast, and I just put the brakes on, the car slew sideways and slammed into this Lotus 19, sideways on. My seat, with the forced impact, my seat split in two, and I was thrown out, forwards, out over the car like that. There's a picture of me in the Evening Standard, speedled out, flying out over the car like that. And as I passed over, because no seatbelts, I guess, was thrown out, which is a good thing in some ways, It was like diving into water. We had these tank driver's goggles. We all wore the same goggles in those days. They were from World War II tanks, rubber goggles with plastic lenses. And it seemed like I just dived into water. What's this liquid coming from? It all happened in a split second as I passed over the car, face down. Fell back on the circuit on my back like that. The car was still moving, and it came over and pinned me down on my shoulders. I was stuck with my shoulder under the car. My body sort of laying out at an angle like that. There's the car and there's my body like that. And what had happened, when I slammed into this Lotus, it squashed the 18-gallon petrol tank. Burst the filler cap open as I passed over it, so I was doused in petrol. So I'm lying on the floor now under the car, and 18 gallons of petrol all around me in the big pool. I'm lying there soaking wet in petrol from head to foot, and there's another 30 cars that come around the corner. And I can hear the cars are going vroom, vroom, past my head and feet. I'm lying on the circuit, thinking, oh dear. Eventually it got quiet, so they're all gone. So I pulled myself under the car, I stood up and I looked down at myself. And I'm covered in blood everywhere, all over my light blue cotton overalls. Because there were no fireproof things in those days. It was blue cotton overalls and plimsolls, £1 a pair from Dunlops. And where's this blood coming from? So I sort of ran away from the car and jumped over that wall, a breeze block wall on the inside of the bend. And I could hear the pump ticking. So I climbed back over, switched the ignition off. But this time, St John's Ambulance Brigade had arrived. They took hold of me and they said, "Oh, we'll take you to the first aid tent. It's only over there, about 300 yards away." I said, all right. So they took one arm each. They walked me to the first aid tent, covered in blood. Left the car there. The marshals dealt with that. Went inside the tent and they took my overalls off, and under the arms, and between here and between your legs, where the petrol had been, all gone white. All the skin had turned white. And I wasn't actually hurt. I was covered in blood, but they were small abrasions, little cuts and things. Probably on the circuit, or coming up the car in there. So they said, "Well, we haven't got any ointment, but we got some cotton wool." And they kept pulling off bits of cotton wool and sticking cotton wool all over me, like Father Christmas. And I sort of pulled the bottom part of my overalls up, still covered in petrol. And they said, "We haven't got any transport, but the pits are just down there, sort of 400 yards down. You can walk back there." So I walked back from the first aid tent, looking like Father Christmas, covered in cotton wool, covered in blood. So, but the amazing thing was, there wasn't a spark. I mean, even the backfire would have caused an inferno. A short circuit on the wiring in the car, the scraping of metal on the gravel, or together. Hot exhaust, no fire, incredible. I'd been burnt to a cinder. Some people are afraid. Some people think of these things, but if you do, you can't go quick. If you get into a racing car and you have to go quick, if you're going to worry about, if I have an accident or if the car catches it, you'll never go quick. You can't. It's impossible. You can't think like that at all. You will not be able to go quick. You've got to put it out of your mind. Forget it. After the GT, I wanted to go back into sports car racing. So Cedric Selzer designed a car we called the Astra, using the original Costin monocoque and the same design concept, space frames front and rear. And he did the rear suspension. He remade the rear suspension. So it was fundamentally the same monocoque, the same scheme, same design, but a more modern model. And we installed a 2-litre Coventry Climax engine in with a Hewland gearbox. Good-looking car. Williams and Pritchard, who had workshops in Edmonton at the time, they did all the aluminium work. They made the aluminium body originally, and then we made moulds from that. Took the car to Montlhery, came third. Other cars had FIA engines in, so I thought I got the wrong engine. Brought it back to the UK. Money was a bit tight, and the FIA engines were, I think, £2,000. Didn't have £2,000, so put it on finance with the car company. And one Cosworth engine on for HP. We installed this FIA in, and it looked right. It was a smaller engine than the Climax, probably a bit lighter, but it just looked right. And it transformed the car. Went out, had 9 events, 7 wins, 2 seconds, and 5 lap records straight off. That was 1969. It was called the Astra RNR1, Roger Nathan Racing 1, because I dropped Frank's name by then because he didn't help with the monocoques. Obviously it created some animosity between us, but we forgot about that later, made it up. But it was strengthened in various ways, though. It was a bit more what they did here and there and strengthened, but it was the same. But, I mean, it's amazing, it was the same basic design for 5 years, it was still competitive. My last race was on the 15th of August, 1971 at Silverstone, again for the Martini, which I won in the Astra, the RNR1 now with the FVC fitted, which was 200cc bigger than the FIAT, it was 1.8. Won the race outright, got the lap record, never raced again.
What was it you think that made you say that was enough?
Well, it wasn't enough actually. It wasn't enough at all. But I spent an awful lot of money motor racing, as you can imagine. And although we made money, it all went back into the team to keep it going. We worked day and night just to get to a race. So I didn't actually make any money, extra money. So I thought, well, I can't afford to design and build another car, and I don't want to anyway. I'm not an engineer, I'm a driver. I want to drive racing cars. So I thought, I'll go and get a sponsor and I'll go into a Formula car, either Formula 2 or Formula 1. It shouldn't be that hard. With my background, I mean, I held more lap records when I retired. I had 29 international lap records, more than any other British driver. I had hundreds of wins in all different, from saloon cars to sports cars to single-seaters. 27. I've been racing for 10 years. So I thought I'd get a sponsor. Anthony can probably back me up on this. It's easier said than done. In those days, 1970, I mean, there was Lotus with John Player. Fine. Chapman started getting sponsors, but it wasn't generally, unless you had money, you couldn't go racing, you couldn't get sponsors, or you came from a wealthy family or whatever. So I made myself a little portfolio up. I knew nothing about PR at all. I wasn't very outgoing. I tended not to mix very much. I didn't drink and socialise either. I thought as long as I could win races and get records and results, that would be sufficient, but it wasn't. And disappointingly, I wasn't able to attract any sponsorship. With a background like that and a success record like that. And I thought, it was sad in fact. I didn't want to give it up, but I wasn't going to go around begging, so I thought, well, to hell with it. I just turned my back and walked away. I wanted to fly from my school days. That was my ideal was to become a jet pilot. So I went to Elstree Aerodrome in North London and signed on for a flying course. I had to do something, didn't I? I was actually ready to go solo after 7 hours, which is fairly quick. I actually went solo after 9 hours, so I delayed getting my medical certificate, but I could have gone solo in 7 hours. And then I went on from there to get further ratings. I got a night rating, I got a multi-engine rating, I got a IMC rating, which is like an instrument rating, but one level down. And I enjoyed flying. It was lovely. The flying was fantastic. Different to motor racing. In motor racing, it's done through feel and through the seat. A bit like horse riding, which I'm no good at. I've tried that, got thrown a few times, soon packed that up. And but flying's different. It's up here. You've got time to sit back and think, and you've got to calculate. You've got navigation. Flight is a whole thing. It's a nice takeoff. You've got the journey, the destination, the end of the flight. It's a complete thing. It's very satisfying, much like motor racing. If you make good landings, your navigation is good, your time is right. It's like having a good race. You feel satisfied. So it was fine. I went back into the car business with my father. He'd opened a branch in Cricklewood on the Edgware Road. He was selling sort of Jaguars and things, and I decided to go into Mercedes, who were doing very well at the time with their SLs. And you couldn't buy 3 or 450 SLs, they were scarce. So I was buying them through places like, overseas, and importing them from right-hand drive countries and selling them in the UK at premium prices. And I moved on to Rolls and Bentleys and things, which you also couldn't get at the time. They made premiums. And so I worked with my dad in the premises. I called it Roger Nathan Concessionaires. So I was flying, and I was buying and selling some aircraft too. And Dad gave me his old finance company, which had lain derelict for years. And I revamped that, and we were doing finance for power boats and things for people we knew, and some trucks for various businesses. So I was quite busy, and also property. I remember going to see a property in Belgravia with Bernie that I thought he might buy. Quite amazing, actually. He went into this place. It was one of the few freehold properties in Belgravia, because apparently the Duke of Westminster lost it as a gambling debt. So it was freehold, because most of the time they were all leasehold. And Bernie came down, he went into this place and looked at it. And he could actually visualise how it would be when it was modified and changed and brought to modern standards. And he decided it was too narrow to put in the lift, and therefore it wasn't worth buying. But he did it so quickly, it was amazing. He had it all in his head, worked it all out, the cost and everything else. I should tell you this actually, because it's just as a story. I bought several Beagle Bassets from the RAF when the squadron was disbanded and the aircraft was sold off, and I bid for them. And I got several of them, and one of them, XS767, was military coding. It just had a complete overhaul. New engines, paint, seats, rubber boots on the wings for de-icing, all new. And of course, in typical government, they sold it off for minimal money. So I bought that, and I kept that one for myself, had it for many years. I decided to sell it. I put an advert in Flight International magazine, which was like Autosport in the old days, which was a paper. It was the racing driver's Bible. Everyone read Motorsport Autosport every week regularly. And so Flight was the same with aircraft. So I put an advert in Flight, and I had a phone call from a chappie in Paris called Gabby. He said, "Can you bring the plane to Paris so I can have a look at it, and I'm interested in possibly buying it?" I said, "Well, not really, Gabby." I said, "If you want to see the plane, you must come to London." What could happen is you fly there, spend £500 on fuel and expenses and landing fees. They try the plane, use up more fuel, then it doesn't want it. "Thank you very much, bye-bye." So I said, "Well, no," I said, if you must really come to London and see it there." And he said, "I can't," he said, "I'm far too busy." I said, "Well, if you're far too busy, then don't leave it," in a polite way. Because once they say they're too busy, to me that means they're not really interested. Put the phone down, finished. 3 weeks later, the same chappie phones back, this time from Brussels. And he's saying the same thing: "Can I bring the aeroplane to Brussels?" I said, "Well, don't want to be rude, Gabby, but we've been through this conversation before. You're welcome to come to London. I'll show you all the papers. I'll take you up for flight. You can test it yourself, if you want to, or bring your pilot." And he said, "Well, I can't come to Brussels." I said, "Why can't you come to London?" He said, "Well, I've just started a new airline in Ostend, a freight airline, and I'm very busy." I said, "Oh," I said, "You're a pilot, are you?" He said, "Yes," he said, "I'm a pilot." He said, "I'm the senior pilot for Middle East Airlines." And I was wondering if he's giving me a yarn. So I said, "Oh yeah." I asked him some questions about this and that, and he answered them very well. He knew what he was doing. Technical questions about flying. And I began to think, this guy could be serious. So I said, "I'll tell you what, Gabby, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to come and see you. I'll bring the plane." He said, "Bring all the spares and all the books." And he said, "I'll meet you at Brussels Airport at the information desk there." I said, "Okay." I said, "I can do that tomorrow." Loaded up the plane with the van, because you get lots of books, lots of logbooks with airplanes. Loaded up the van, all the books, and next day took off, flew to Brussels, met Gabby. He was Lebanese actually, little moustache. We sat down and had lunch and had a few beers. Nice guy. I'm talking to him, and it turns out he's also the personal pilot of King Hussein of Jordan. He flies the King 707 Boeing around. Oh, so very interesting. He said, "Can I see all your documents?" I showed him the logbooks. He looked through those quickly. He looked through the registration. And he didn't look at the plane. It was parked out on the apron. He said, "I'll buy it." "Oh, yeah?" I said, "Oh." I said, "Fine." He hadn't seen the plane at all. I said, "How are you going to pay?" "Oh," he said, "I'll pay you now. So I'll give you some cash now, and the balance can be, I'll have a cheque for the balance." I don't really know this guy. I mean, it sounds fantastic and it sounds all very good, but what do I do about the cheque? I didn't want to upset him and refuse his cheque. So I said, "Well, where's the cheque drawn?" He said, "It's drawn on the Lebanese Brazilian bank somewhere in South America." In Brazil, I suppose. I thought that's not very helpful. Anyway, so I thought, I think he's okay. I think he'll be all right. And he said, "By the way," he said, if you agree, he said, "Can you fly me?" He said, "You can go and bank the cheque now in the airport and the bank there. And can you fly me to Nice tonight in south of France?" Because by now it was getting dark. So I said, "Yeah." I said, "I can take you to Nice." "Oh," he said, I'll pay your expenses and stay in a hotel, and obviously in a hotel, and I'll pay your fare back to London." I said, "Fine, I'll do that." Flew to Nice, got there about 1 o'clock in the morning, and met his wife there and his son-in-law to be. He went into Nice from the airport, had a pizza, and during the meal he said to me, "Oh, one more thing." He said, "Can you, if you're free," he said, "can you take me to Athens tomorrow?" Oh, he said, "Same deal, expenses, and I'll pay your ticket back to London from Athens." And I thought, well, it's good because A, I'm enjoying the flight, because I was learning a lot from him. He was very knowledgeable, highly experienced. He was 44 years old. He had 24,000 hours in his logbook. That's a huge number of hours. When people come at the RAF after a career, there's 4,000 or 5,000 hours in their logbook. Anyway, so I was enjoying it, and I see her. I'll go to Athens. Fine. Took off to Athens and had to stop at Naples for fuel, and got to Athens fairly late in the evening. By this time I'd been flying for 2 days, from sort of dawn till dusk almost, and it was tiring. And he wouldn't fly the plane at all. I said, "Well, why don't you fly?" He said, "Well, my contract forbids me to fly any aircraft not owned by Middle East Airlines." I said, "All right, no, I'll fly, I don't mind." So anyway, got to Athens at about, I don't know, 7 o'clock at night or evening. And all I wanted to do was have a shower and go to bed. I was tired. He was very hospitable, a jolly fellow, and he said, "Come down to the bar, let's have a drink." I thought, well, he said, "Come on," he said, "you can sleep later." I said, "Okay." Let me just go and freshen up. Freshened up, came down to the bar, and he's sitting at the bar, and next to him is this gorgeous girl, an absolute stunner. And I woke up and I said, "Hello, Gabby." I said, "What are you drinking?" I said, "I'll have a orange juice or something." And he said, "Oh, you see, by the way," he said, "meet Judy. Judy works for Middle East Airlines. She's a first-class air stewardess. And this is Roger, an English captain. Roger Judy." I said, "Hello, Judy." And I sat next to this girl and we're chatting away, and I suddenly realised this is a very interesting young lady. She spoke 5 languages: English, Arabic, Armenian, French and Turkish, fluently, very good English, a pretty girl. And I was quite fascinated by her. I said, "What do you do?" She said, "Well, I fly when the Arabs come at Christmas time with their family, and they hire a jumbo jet to go to New York for the Christmas holidays, whatever they call it. I go with them because that's what I do." And I thought, well, that must be very interesting. And anyway, I was fascinated by this girl, and I said, "Can I call you again? Or can I contact you?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "Sure, and give me a call." Anyway, during we were sitting at the bar, then Gabby said again, "Oh, by the way, can I ask you another favour?" I said, "Yes." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Can we go on to Larnaca tomorrow in Cyprus?" He said, "Same thing, expenses and ticket back from Larnaca." And I thought, well, that's interesting, because if I go to Larnaca, I can fly back and I can see Judy again in Athens on the way back to London. So I said, "Yes, Gabby, we'll go to Larnaca, fine, no problem." Went to bed. Again, early next morning, get up, file the flight plan to Larnaca, take off, and we're flying over the mid. I called up Larnaca and I gave them our ETA, and they gave us the joining instructions, and Gabby sort of started muttering. I said, "What is it, Gabby?" He said, "He's always telling us there's something else I want to do." I said, "What do you want to do, Gabby?" He said, I want to go somewhere. I don't want to land at Larnaca." "Well, somewhere else?" I said, "Where do you want to go?" And he sort of looked a bit hesitant and said, "I want to go further east." I'm thinking, does he want to go to Turkey? Does he want to go on to Russia? Where does he want to go? I said, "Well, where do you want to go?" He said, "I want to go to Lebanon, to Beirut." This was in 1976, the height of the Civil War.
Did you know what he was doing at these?
No, I didn't know. I think he had his family, he had his wife on board and his son-in-law to be. I just thought maybe they live in London, in Cyprus. I don't know where they live. Anyway, so I said, "We can't go there." I said, there's a war going on there. The airport's closed. The air place is closed." I said, "There's no other airfields there's only the one airfield in there." "Oh," he said, "no." He said, "We can do it." I said, "Well, how are we going to do it?" He said, "Well, call up Larnaca, tell them that we want to refile the plan to land at the Damascus. Let's get away from Larnaca." I said, "Where are we going to land in Lebanon?" Because the airport's controlled by the rebels. I think they were Palestinian rebels. A bit like Hamas today. They had another name, I forget what they call themselves now. The PLO, I think. Anyway, so I said, "Well, where are we going to land?" He said, "Well, don't worry." He said, "I'm working with the Christian militia, and we prepared a special landing strip in a Christian area just north of Beirut called Judy." Well, Judy was like the Paris of Arabia for the Arabs, because it was free. The Lebanese drink, they had parties and girlfriends and casinos. It was a lovely place. The mountains for skiing. It's the only place I know you can ski in the afternoon and swim in the morning in the sea, or swim in the morning in warm water and go up the mountains and go skiing in the afternoon. incredible place. So I said, well, I thought I'd never flown in a war zone before. It might be interesting. So I said, all right, well, it's hard to say no. He's in there. He's been very good to me. He's looked after me very well. He's got his wife there with all the gear on board, and his son-in-law to be is in the back there with the wife. And I thought, I'll have to take it. I guess we'll have a go. He said, right. He said, okay, I agree to go in. He said, right. He said, well, see those two mountains? Aim between those two mountains, because the Lebanese coastline, it's only about a 40-minute flight from Larnaca to Lebanon. Aim for those two mountains, and let's call up Damascus first and refile, tell me want to refile. Call up Larnaca rather. So we're off there with them, cleared with them. Headed for the coast, and he said, now, when you get overhead, I want you to fly over the Judy, and look at the landing strip and orientate yourself for a landing. I said, fine. So we're down to 1,000 feet now to get off the radar from Larnaca, so they can't see us where we're going. I can see the town of Judy, and immediately behind the town, the mountain goes up to 6,000 feet. There's a few buildings in the town going up the mountainside. The main town is at sea level. And I saw the coast road coming north from Beirut, and there was a right-angle bend into Judy. Flying overhead, I'm looking down, I got the airplane on a 45-degree bank, and I'm circling, and I can't see the airfield he's talking about. And he said, I said, I'm going to go around again. He said, why are you going around again? I said, I can't see the airfield. He said, it's there, it's right underneath us. I'm looking out. I said, well, I can't see it. And it suddenly dawns on me, what he says is this airfield is a single-track road leading from the sea into the centre of town. And it looks tiny, and it was very narrow. I said, well, we can't land there. I said, it's not big enough. I said, it's not long enough. Oh, he said, it is. I said, well, how long is it? I forget what he said. It was something like 2,500 feet or something like that. So I quickly pulled out the RAF manual from the side pocket and looked at the landing distances. And according to the manual, it couldn't be done. Particularly as you land and take off into wind to reduce your ground speed, always. But I couldn't land into wind, which was coming from the sea, because the mountains were there, and I couldn't get low enough on the approach to meet the runway. Because it was too close to the mountain. I couldn't get low enough quick enough. Couldn't reduce the speed. So I had to land downwind, which made it even worse. I said, well, according to the manual, it can't be done, Gabby. But he was very cunning. During the flights, he'd been watching the markers on the runways and telling me to use full power and do maximum shortest stopping distance. And he worked out what it was. He said, it can be done. I said, well, okay, we'll have to give it a try, won't we? We can't do much else now, we're committed. Came round, went out to sea again, came back in, slowest possible speed, nose up, just enough airspeed to stop it stalling, because the problem was, right at the beginning of that runway or road, there was a big concrete building, which was some sort of electrical facility, like a power station. So I had to get over that before I could get onto the runway. So I'm going along just above the stall, I'm looking under the wing, and as soon as that building passed under the wing, closed both throttles, the thing dropped like a brick, because it was very slow. And I thought, we're going to smash into the runway at this rate and break the undercarriage. Full power, 2 seconds, 1, 2, back. It just settled down nicely on the two main wheels. Put the nose wheel down, put the brakes on. And we're flying down this single track road. There's pylons either side, almost touching the wingtips. There's sentry boxes with armed men, all carrying Kalashnikovs, they've slung over their shoulders. I'm flying down this road, and the barrier's coming up, the brakes are fading. I'm starting to pump the brakes, which I've never done before, to keep the pressure up. And Gary said, we're not stopping. I said, we are, Gary, we're stopping. But we weren't stopping. 30 feet from the barrier, I managed to stop the aircraft. The barrier across there led into town, an armed gate. And the brakes were smoking hot, steaming hot, everyone's sweating inside the aeroplane. And all of a sudden, hundreds of people are rushing towards us. And the props are still turning, of course they can't see that. And people could run into a propeller and not see it. So I immediately shut down both engines before we chopped somebody into pieces. And everyone's armed, they're all in fatigues, they've got grenades on their belt, they're all carrying Kalashnikovs, running to the aeroplane. What the hell's going on here? They pulled us out of the aeroplane, put us on their shoulders, carried us to a cafe on the waterside and gave us lunch. We're heroes, we were the first plane to land there since the airport closed the year before. Gabby was obviously very close to the Christian militia, being a Christian Lebanese. They've got a big Christian community there. There were a lot of wealthy people there as well, and they couldn't get out of the country except by taking a boat to Larnaca, which took quite a long time. There's a chance of being stopped on the water, pirates and things, and it wasn't really safe. So he wanted to establish an air link to Larnaca. This is the plane he chose, happened to be my plane. So while we're there, anyway, we landed, we've had our lunch there and gone back to Gabby's flat and stayed with Gabby in his flat. And he showed me a very nice picture of him with King Hussein in the cockpit of the King 707. They've got their little moustaches. They look very nice. Anyway, so he said, as I'm there now, would I mind staying a bit longer and starting the service for him? I said, he'll pay me and for my services and obviously give him my ticket back to London. And by this time he'd become quite friendly and I trusted him. And I said, yeah, well, that's fine, Gabby, I'll start, certainly. Anyway, so the first flight was arranged. And I said, well, what we should do, because the runway's short, we should take off early morning when it's cooler, so we have more power from the engines. But of course, being Lebanese, they didn't get up till 11 o'clock. And by the time they dress and have their breakfast and coffee, while they're having their croissant, it's 1 o'clock, the hottest time of the day. A lot of people, load of bags, planes packed, we get in it. The militia pushed the plane right back so the tail's almost touching the barrier at the town side end, and I land up at the runway. I can see it down the runway, you've got this big blockhouse on the end, and then you've got those big rocks they use, big boulders as water breakers. There's a huge pile of rocks there at the end of the runway. So I thought, okay, we're pretty heavy now, but we are taking off into wind, which helps. But what happened, because the props weren't contra-rotating, they both turned the same way, it means that the aircraft, when you start it, it swerves left. If you have contra-rotating props, it doesn't swerve. So when you swerve left, you normally correct it by tapping the right toe brake. So that keeps it straight. But I was reluctant to do that because if you touch the brake, you're losing 2 or 3 knots. Although the aircraft will straighten up, you're losing speed. And I was very concerned it wouldn't be enough runway to take off. Because again, the manual says it can't be done, given the temperature and the weight we're carrying and the length of the runway. But Gabby seemed to think that it could be done, as I told you before, he worked it all out. So I decided to take off. Normally you set 15 degrees of flap for takeoff, so I thought, well, there'll be no flaps, that'll slow us down. And when I get to 60 knots, I'll then lower the flap. So full power, dust blowing everywhere from the road, engines are roaring, release the brakes, the thing surges forward, it's going down the runway, and it's starting to veer to the left again. Just dab the brakes slightly to keep it in the centre of the runway, but by that time the rudder's starting to take effect because the speed is building up, so I didn't need to touch the brakes very much. Lift-off speed was 85 knots. If you took off at 84 knots or 82 knots, it wouldn't climb. It had to be 85 knots to lift off. I'm looking at the speedo, we've got 60 knots on the SP indicator. A lot of the runway's gone. Speed's building up to 70 knots. And this building at the end, this big blockhouse thing, is getting bigger and bigger in the windscreen. Gabby's saying, I can hear him, I'm not looking at him, I'm watching the end of the runway. He's saying, lift off, lift off. I said, no, it's too soon. What would happen if I lifted off, it would lift off, and it would come down again. Then we wouldn't have a second chance. We'd end up in the rocks, in the huge explosion. Get to 80 knots. And by this time, this building is really big in the windscreen. We're really close to the end of the runway, and these massive boulders and sea breakers there. It creeps up, when you watch a thing, and it never seems to happen, it's like watching a clock, or you're watching a kettle boil, it never seems to boil. I'm watching the speedo coming up, eventually gets to 85 knots. Pull the stick back, it lifts off, oh good, but then it stabilised. I thought it was going to come down. I thought, God help us if it comes down. It would have been the end of it. And I gently shook the stick. You know the racing car, when you're on the drifting, you turn the wheel and catch the drift. I was doing the same with the ailerons, not the ailerons, the elevator, to keep the thing from coming down. And eventually it stabilised, put the undercarriage up, but this time I had to swerve left to avoid this building, so we're going to run into it. I swerved left at almost 0 feet, and it started to climb slowly, and we got away with it. It was a hairy old thing though. It really was. It was only just. But in the end, when I got used to it, I ended up doing that at night. Coming in and out at night. It wasn't a problem, in fact, but that was interesting. It was exciting, like motor racing. It was a challenge. Judy, well, Because the war was on and there were no mobile phones, I couldn't communicate. I knew where she was staying. It was in the Vula Beach Hotel in Athens. That's where all the Middle East airline crew stay. That's why Gary took me there originally. But I couldn't contact her because no way. No phones. You can't send telegrams. And there's no post, obviously. The place is at war. And I was thinking about it all the time. Couldn't get it out of my head. Anyway, eventually, I had a chance to fly back to Athens. In fact, what I was doing, I was leaving there and I was going back to London to do some servicing on the aircraft because we use it quite a lot. So I thought, this is my chance. So after 3 weeks, I think it was, or 3 or maybe 4, flew back to Athens, dumped the plane as quick as I could, jumped into the taxi, said, straight to the Vula Beach Hotel, hoping she'll still be there. And because if she wasn't, that was it, I wouldn't know where she was. Went to reception, I said, her name was Armenian. She was actually Lebanese Armenian. I said, is Judy, I said, is she here? She said, well, she's still in the hotel, but she's not here now. I said, I'll wait. So I sat in the lobby, all thumbs and fingers, like a nervous little 15-year-old boy going on his first date. Suddenly I see her walking in. So I'm very excited. I thought, oh, fantastic, here she is. I walked up to her, I said, hello, Judy. I said, how are you? And she looked at me. She said, who are you? She forgot about me, totally forgot about me. Didn't even know who I was. I couldn't get it out of my mind all this time. And I said, oh, I'm Roger. Who? Roger. Oh, yes, I remember you. Yeah, that was fine, yeah, okay. And anyway, I said, well, would you like to come out for dinner tonight? And she agreed. And ended up marrying her sometime later. That was my first wife. Well, Judy and I were deciding where to go for Christmas 1981. It was either Inverlochy Castle or West Africa, because at that time Dad sold the showroom and I'd moved out, so the car business wasn't really of any interest to me anymore, and didn't have the premises. I didn't want to be stuck in the showroom all the time, too used to moving around. So she said, well, the price of gold has just gone up to $1,000 an ounce for the first time from $50 early on in the years, and people were selling all their jewellery for scrap, just for weight. It was a big thing at the time. So she said, let's open a gold shop, because I can deal with that, and it'll give me something to do, and it'll make us some money. So I said, oh, fine. So I bought a lease for a shop for it in Kilburn. And we opened this shop, had it done up, put her in there. I went to open up first day because she wasn't quite ready, and there was a queue outside the door waiting to come in, 9 o'clock in the morning. People lining up with armfuls of silver things and gold and jewellery and bags, and I didn't know what to do with it, so she came in and it was hardly profitable. It made more money than the car business. There was no outlay. Because you start off with no stock. During the day the gold would come in, which you buy. At the end of the day you got stock with, say, I don't know, £10,000. You take it and sell it and make 10% or whatever it was. So it was making money from nothing, really. It was a very good business. So we got to Christmas time, as I said, and we thought we'd have a break. A lot of the people selling us this gold were Africans, mainly from Sierra Leone and West Africa in general, mainly Sierra Leone. I remember saying to one of them, or some of them, are you happy with the price we're giving you? They said, oh yeah, we're happy with that. And I said, well, how do you get this gold? Oh, we say we buy it from the villagers who mine it. Oh yeah. So I thought, well, the obvious thing to do here, we thought, is cut the middleman out and go to Africa and buy the gold ourselves from the miners. And that's why we decided to go to Sierra Leone instead of Inverlochy Castle. And she had Lebanese friends out there. The Lebanese then controlled the economy there. They were all the business people. And they ran the economy. So this Lebanese friend she had there offered us a Mercedes and the driver. So we packed a suitcase full of local money and set off into the bush to a place called Tonkalili. I call it Auntie Lily, but it was really Tonkalili. And this is a good gold area. And I said, okay. I said, what do we do? I said, when we get there, we first have to go and see the town chief, or the paramount chief rather, to tell him we're in the area and what we want to do. And because till he gives his permission, the people won't deal with us. So we said, fine, let's go and see the paramount chief. His name was Ali Mami Bangura II. He had 2 big gold teeth here and a bad throat. And we sat he had a little hut with a tin roof, and we're sitting in there. And he sort of got his back turned away from us, and we're sitting there. And the guy we got with us says, he wants something. Oh, I said, oh yes, I say, I understand. So we anticipated this, and I bought a box of imitation gold watches, Rolexes and Longis and Omegas and that kind of flashy watches. And I said, here we are, Chief. I said, have a look at these and choose one for yourself. And he saw this box of watches. His eyes lit up. His whole face and demeanour changed. And he took a watch out, and then everything changed. He was friendly, and he said, go and see the people, and send his man out to see us we're all right with the locals. And we went out, we set up a balancing scale which he bought in Hatton Garden to weigh the gold on the bonnet of the Mercedes. A long queue of people lined up with little bits of gold to sell us from the river. And that's how we started. And it takes a long time to buy, because each man, or each woman rather, the women tend to mine the gold, or wash the gold. It takes a long time to buy a few ounces, or less, even grams. And it's very time consuming. It was dangerous from a security point of view, and you couldn't get enough gold. So I thought the best thing to do is to forget about buying it. What about mining? So I said, well, can you show me where you get the gold? So they took me down to the riverbank, and the men were digging the gravel from the riverbank, put it in this thing called a calabash, which is it's like a gold pan basically. It's a skin, like a hard skin from a fruit. They wash the same as a gold pan. And the women wash it and extract these tiny grains of gold in dust form. So I thought the best thing to do here is to come back with a mining engineer and set out a mechanised mining operation. So I came back to London, went to the geological department of Imperial College in London, saw a professor, and he said, I'm just the man for you, a fellow called Derek Norris. And I met up with Derek, and I put him on a 3-month contract to come to West Africa with me, show me the ropes, and get a report on where's the best place to mine, which he did. And I spent sort of 3 months with him in the bush, going around from village to village. I mean, we were prospecting, and we were on rivers and things, and crossing in dugout canoes into areas where no other white people were, and it was very interesting. It was a bit adventurous too, a bit like the old days, the colonial days. White man going to the bush and things, and because it was quite interesting there. It's an old British colony, and once you get away from the town, the people still call you master. Yes, master, no master. It reminded me of the old days. It was interesting. On the basis of Derek's report, I went and bought a dredge in California, from an American-made dredge, and shipped it out to Sierra Leone. We started dredging the Bavi River in the eastern province of Sierra Leone. Here I was in the middle of the Bavi River, amongst the scorpions, the cobras and mambas, mining gold through this dredge. But that had its own problems though. There were lots of demarcation disputes with the locals. I found out the best thing to mine wasn't so much gold really, because they had gold and diamonds sometimes in the same areas. And obviously the diamonds were far more than the gold. So because of my mechanical ability from racing days, I was able to modify the dredge and the machinery that would capture diamonds instead, and the gold would be a byproduct. And we found quite a few diamonds. I stayed there for several years mining diamonds, went to some very remote places, went to a place called Weimar. I was the only white man for 200 miles living in a village of 5,000 local people. We had our own mud hut with a tin roof and a concrete step, a local cook who also cut my hair. she was all right. It was a bit like the Wild West out there. It was a frontier place. And you had to watch out, you didn't upset people. I mean, quite often we find bodies floating downstream, but they become entangled in the mooring cables for the dredge. I remember saying, well, what are we going to do with this body? And they said, oh, somebody's upset somebody. I said, well, he said, no, just go, we'll take it on shore and bury it. I mean, nobody cared. It was quite exciting. There were challenges there. I lived in a tent for a year alongside the Baffy River, a big green tent I bought in Holborn. Well, I finished up there in, I never really finished, well, there was a break, in fact, till 1992, when the Civil War started. I knew from my contacts there that the government had closed the roads, so all the diamond and gold dealers and the people up country couldn't get down to town because the rebels were cashing them on the road, locking them in the car, and pouring petrol over the car and setting the cars on fire with the people inside it. So nobody would use the road, it was too dangerous. So I thought the obvious thing to do is to set up an air bridge. At that time the Soviet Union was in the process of collapsing. So I flew to Belarus, a place called Gomel, and I had a Russian guide at the time. He took me to Gomel, and I ended up buying 2 Antonov AN-2 aircraft, which I flight tested before I bought them from the Russians. And one of them was fine. The other one had a slight vibration. And I said, this engine's not right. And I was with a very experienced Hungarian pilot who was flying 707s, he came with me to lend a hand, and he said, well, it all seems all right. I said, no, I said, this engine's not right. We landed, and the Russians said, no, you're right, it has a problem. Anyway, so I bought 2 of these, and in Hungary, we worked on the aircraft there, and the Russian crews were contracted, and they met us in Hungary, and we flew the aircraft down to Sierra Leone. The first one we took down, it took 7 days to get there, because it was a very slow biplane, a huge thing, the biggest biplane in the world. And it flew at 94 knots. I mean, it took us 2 days to cross the Sahara. And we were stopping at places that in the Sahara to get fuel and things. It was quite a journey. And it was, the temperature in the cockpit was 40 degrees across the Sahara at 4,000 feet. And the old temperature gauge was flickering between the hot and the red. The whole of that 2 days crossing the Sahara, looking at this temperature gauge and watching the needle, willing it to go back into the green from the red. So when we come down in the desert, there were no mobile phones and things there, you know, you might not be found in the middle of the Sahara. It's 2,000 miles of endless sand. Nothing there at all. Not a rock, not a tree, nothing green, nothing, just sand. And then we had to cross the Atlas Mountains, and because of the weight, we couldn't get across the mountains, so I had to find a path through the mountains in southern Morocco before we reached the Sahara. But it was an adventure, and that's what I liked. It was all good, clean fun. Anyway, so we got to Sierra Leone. We were greeted by the military representatives from the military government, who probably wanted to use us for various missions. And I set up an airline there called African Air Charter. We found some newly built premises in Lightfoot, Boston Street, and that was our base. And we started flying to the provincial mining areas. There was the eastern province where there was Bo, which is the second capital city, B-O, Bo, and there was Kenema, and the place where all the diamonds were mainly in Yengama, in the Far East, and we were doing regular runs, flying backwards and forwards. And also during that period, we did a lot of flights for the World Health Service and the World Food, WHO, I think it is. And they asked us to fly rice and things to the various villages in the bush, which weren't accessible. And one of the missions we did, we were approached by the Italian ambassador. There were 7 nuns, Italian nuns, held captive by the rebels. And we were asked if we can help get these nuns freed. And because of my contacts there, and various risks were taken and contacts made with the rebels, we were able to secure the release of the nuns, and they were later invited to meet the Pope in the Vatican. Unharmed too, they were. Came back to England in the late 90s, I think, late 1990s, because the war had more or less stopped by then, and the airline had done its thing, and it was time to move on. I started with an old friend of mine who also was in the car business in Manchester in quite a big way. His name was Ron Porter, and he started in Wales, and he'd done very well in Wales, North Wales. And he said, well, why don't you come and join me, because I want to retire soon and go and live in Asia. What's that country called where you get all these pretty girls? And
Thailand.
And go live in Thailand, yeah. And you can buy my premises from me. So I said, okay, I'll come and give it a try. So back in the car business again after 40 years. Not that I wanted to be, but it seemed like the thing to do, so I wasn't doing much else at the time. And I stayed up there until 2007. I retired, officially retired then, yeah. I did go backwards and forwards to Sierra Leone. I went on a diamond course in Hatton Garden to learn to value diamonds, so I can go and buy diamonds there as opposed to mining. Tried my hand at diamond buying and going to Belgium, to Antwerp, which was the main centre then for selling diamonds. But that it was a bit tedious. In 2005, I think it was, somebody called Michael Flanagan, phoned me from Manchester to say that a friend of his has a Costin-Nathan car and he thinks it's a prototype. The first one we built, the open car, the one at Montlhéry. So he said, would you like to come and see it? And I said, yes, fine. I got the train to Manchester a few days later. Michael met me at the station. We jumped in a taxi. He said, let's stop for a cup of coffee. I said, well, why don't we go? We're going to the house. We'll go get a cup of coffee there. He said, no, he said, let's stop now. I thought, oh, I said, want to. So we stopped for coffee and we got to the house. And we were met by this fellow called Jeff Horsley. And apparently he was a bit of a recluse. And he had this house in Manchester and lots of other properties. Quite a wealthy guy. And he was the actual man that bought the car from me at the end of the 1966 season for Chris Migg to drive in the following year. And he'd had the car stored in this house for 45 years in an unheated garage. So it was in terrible condition. And the monocoque was a pile of mouldy wood, and all the frames had rusted through, and all the magnesium wheels were covered in that white stuff, aluminium fungus. It goes white if it's not protected. It's a load of junk. And we're talking to the man for about 2 hours in his garage. It's freezing cold in winter, and he hasn't even offered us a cup of tea. So I can see now, because he was an odd man, and I can see now my wife was there, let's have our tea before we go there, because he knew he wouldn't get it when we got there. Can you imagine? All the way from Manchester, to Manchester, from London, and you don't get offered a cup of tea? Stuck out in the cold for 2 hours, looking at this wreck in the unheated garage. So I forgot about that, I went back home. Then in 2016, I get a call from, I think it was H&H Auctions. And they said, we think it's one of your prototype car for sale. Would you be interested to come and see it at the auction? I said, well, I suppose, okay, I'll come up. So I drove up there very casually, nothing in mind, apart from a day out. I went to Chateau Impney. Chris Meek had obviously bought some body panels from me, or Horsley had, and turned it into a GT. It wasn't a proper GT because the sort of roof was just screwed into the monocoque. It wasn't fixed properly at all. It wasn't secure. It was a bit of a mess. And they changed the engine and things, and I thought, well, I might, if I can buy it for about $5,000, it's worth it for old time's sake. A bit of a memento. Because nothing left from those days. It had loads of stuff. It'd been the lot. There were body moulds, there was all sorts of tooling and drawings. Everything was drawn in detail, all the parts, all scrapped. Anyway, they were all thrown out. A man with a horse and cart came and cleared them out one day, and that was the end of it. So the auction started. It started bidding at £10,000. Who will give me £10,000? Who will give me? And it went up to 10, from 10 to 12, 30, 40, 20, 25,000. I couldn't believe it. And there was this Japanese chappie there, kept waving his paper to bid more. And there was somebody online buying it from America as well. They were bidding against each other. And it went up to £80,000. It was unbelievable. And I was totally blown out by this. And the hammer went down, it actually sold, with commission it was more than 80,000, but it sold for £80,000. Next thing, I get a call, not the next thing, about 2 weeks later I went back to London, I got a call from somebody in America who said that he was going to get the car restored. The person who wanted it restored said it was too big a job to take on, especially in wood. And he said, can you help me sort it out? I said, well, I probably could. He said, come to America, and he said, let's have a chat and see what we can do. So he sent me a ticket. I flew out to California, and we spent about a week together. A very nice guy, very interesting. And I said, it's a matter of interest. Why did you buy this car? He said, because he likes things that are different and successful. Well, this was certainly different because it was a wooden car, and it was very successful. So it fitted his ticket perfectly. And I said, okay, I can restore it for you. You leave it to me, and you can send me some money each month, and I'll get on with the job for you. And I set about finding out the best people to go to, and I ended up going to Rolson Racing down near Lyddon in Kent, run by Guy Shepherd, and he had a colleague called John Saborin who did most of the work on the car, who did a very good job of restoring it. It actually took 2 years of full-time work to restore that car. I mean, it was a huge job. And when it was finished, it was like a work of art, a jewel. I mean, the finish on it was superb. And we left all the wooden part inside in natural wood. We didn't paint it over like we used to in the old days. So all the inside was natural wood and the outside was painted red. And that's the car that was in Bewley for 2 years in the National Motor Museum. When the contract finished in Bewley, it went into storage. It's still in storage now, just north of London. In a specialised storage centre. I then got another call, a private call this time, from one of the H&H directors. They found another car, Costin-Nathan GT, the one with the roof that we went to Le Mans with, that model. And he said, would I be interested in buying before the auction? So I spoke to Michael, and he said, yeah, buy it. I said, fine. And he bought the car, and he went straight into Rolson's, and John again worked on that. It took 3 years, but we had a year's COVID in between, so another 2 years. So it's taken really, 5 years have elapsed on those two cars. But the GT, they're both works of art, and they look fabulous. And when it was at the NEC last week, he had a huge amount of interest there. People loved it. It's interesting. What is it? And who is it? And what happened to it? And where did it come from? How old is it? It looks so different. And when you tell them it's wood, I mean, they're astounded. Okay, the first book, again, this is not my idea. This was written or published in 2006. I had a phone call from a Swiss chappie, a Swiss banker in fact, called Stefan Gutzwiller. He bought one of my Astras, and he'd raced it, and he suddenly found me somehow and said he has the Astra, he loves it, and would I be interested in driving it with him on the continent? So I said, yes, I would, and in England. I think I flew to Geneva and he met me there, and I spent a few days there, and he said to me over dinner one day, well, like I've been talking to you, you've got some fantastic stories, he said. Why don't you write a book? I said, I can't write a book. I said, I'm not an author. He said, well, you can write a book. He said, anybody can write a book. He said, what you've been telling me, if that was in print, it would be great. So I said, well, okay. So he said, look, he said, I'll finance the book. You write it and get it published, and I'll pay the bill. And I said, fine. And that's how this book came to be. The second book, again, people like you, James, I'm telling these stories to. I told the African stories. I told them African stories, not the book stories, because they weren't racing people. I said about the things I did in Africa with the flying, and they all listened very keenly. They were very interested, and they seemed fascinated by it all. So I keep hearing people say, well, you know, you should get this known, let more people hear about this. So I thought, well, that means I've got to write another book. And in fact, Guy Loveridge, who's known in the motor racing world, is a commentator. He lives up north in Yorkshire. He actually started with me on this in 2017. And he said he'd like to publish it if I write it. And so we agreed on a deal, and I wrote the book, and he published it. But this is mainly about, obviously there's a lead-in for the first chapter from the motor racing book. This is basically about life after motor racing. And that includes all the flying in Africa, and the various business transactions I was involved in London, all kinds of things. There was a huge fraud that I was unfortunately involved with. It was a fraud against me. I wasn't part of the fraud. And it's a very interesting story, getting that money back. It was a lot of money, which I managed to get back, and I was the only one to do so out of hundreds of investors. And the details of how that worked over the 18 months that I was in an acutely precarious situation, how that came to be worked out successfully. And many things like that. What I'm doing currently, apart from this interview, I'm probably going to go back to Sierra Leone. I have a project in mind there which I've been working on for some time, to take over a large British hovercraft, a British-built hovercraft, about 130 seats, and start a ferry service in Sierra Leone from the airport to the capital city, Freetown. At the moment they're using small boats there, which is far from ideal, and the hovercraft is the solution there. I mean, it looks highly profitable. Obviously, it's going to cost quite a lot of money to require a lot of capital to get the thing up and running, but it's another challenge, and I think if it does as well as the Airline, I'll be very happy.